That's a lovely sound. This is a Super 8 cine camera. This is the one that my dad used when I was a kid. It's about 53, 54 years old and still works. I took over using it, and the film in here used to have a little cartridge in here that used to go in. We used to get about 3 minutes of filming at a time, and we just loved it. And right in there is where the shutter is. And this brings me on to shutter angle, because in cine cameras, unlike today with digital cameras, whatever it is, digital cinema cameras and so on, there used to be a shutter inside. So on a stills camera, it kind of goes like this, up and down the shutter, or from side to side, but mainly most of them are up and down. But inside one of these cameras, in that gate that you saw there, there was a spinning disc, and it would spin round once for each frame. And that's where shutter angle comes in, because this angle here is 180 degrees. So it used to spin round and it would be open for one frame, half that amount of time. So if you were shooting at 24 frames per second, it'd be 1/48th of a second, half the amount of time. If you were doing 25 frames per second, 50th of a second, and if it was 30 frames per second, it'd be a 60th of a second. And there could be other frame rates as well. So you could have 100 frames per second if you were doing slow motion, and it would do 200th of a second. So you can see that actually, as you increased your frame rate, automatically the shutter changed as well. The shutter changed, which is very useful, because if you're doing things like slow motion, you're slowing it down, you want less blur. 50th of a second, 48th of a second, 60th of a second, not really fast enough to stop actual motion blur. So we kind of accept that in cine film. But if you're doing slow motion, you want to make it a little bit sharper, less motion blur, so you increase the shutter speed. So this would spin faster and faster. So the shutter angle, as I said, that's 180 degrees. That's how much is open. If you had 90 degrees, because you want to change the exposure, it would look like that. So it would be open for a quarter of that amount of time. Okay, so that's 90 degrees there. And if you're doing, say, 270, and there could be all sorts of others in between, and you could even have 360, which would be fully open, but you can see that's the 270 degrees. This is taking you all back to mathematics and geometry from high school. But do we really need it when we're using our digital cameras, whether it's mirrorless or a cine camera, and it has this feature in there? So it's over here, the 180 degrees that you can see down there. And well, do you really need it? Why can't I just put in, I'm shooting 25 frames per second. Why don't I just do a 50th of a second? And I can. So why would you want to use a shutter angle? Well, that's really useful if you're changing frame rates a lot. Maybe you want to do slow motion often, or you maybe want to do high, make it look faster, and you're changing that on a regular basis. Then you don't have to think about changing your shutter speed. So if I was shooting at 100 frames per second, I would then change it to 200th of a second, and so on. And I've got to remember to change the shutter speed. But if I've got it as a shutter angle, it automatically changes, because just imagine the disc spinning faster as you're putting more frames per second through it. So that's why it's there. Do you need it? Maybe not. I don't know. I like switching into slow motion, so I've got it 180 degrees there. Some people think it just looks more professional. It has nothing to do, by the way, with making your footage or anything like that look more cinematic. That would be down to your lighting and your frame rates and all sorts of things like that. So it's got nothing to do with making it look cinematic. Just remember that. But you might just like to have it on there. Perhaps directors and things might look at it and think it looks good. Now, some people have their particular frame rates to get a particular look, and you might see that on motion pictures. If you're looking at behind the scenes, you might see them using a particular shutter angle that they like. So everyone has their thing. So just remember, the 180 is referring to how much it is open here, and it could be smaller, such as 90, and so on. Do I change my shutter angle? Not really, unless I really need to change the exposure. And to be honest, I don't really find that I need to do that. Anyway, I hope that helps. I hope that clears up why it's called shutter angle and why you might want to use it. Thanks for watching. If you do like this, please do like, share, and subscribe, and come back for more.